You feel the cold first, not the kind that numbs your fingers, but the kind that reaches into your chest and makes every breath a knife. The snow beneath your boots is so packed it doesn't crunch, it cracks. And in the distance, through the morning fog that clings to the frozen marshes like a death shroud, you hear it. The sound that has ended civilizations. 10,000 horses, moving as one, their breath rising like dragon smoke in the winter air. You look down at your hands, gripping an axe your grandfather carried, and you realize with perfect clarity, this is the day you die. But if you're going to die, you're going to make them remember it. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. It never stops amazing me that a battle fought in a frozen valley 7 centuries ago can reach people across every continent today. February 1240, somewhere in the vast forests between what we now call Russia and the Baltic states. 100 men are about to rewrite what empires believe about power. Their names are lost to time. Their faces exist only in legend. But what they did in 8 hours of continuous combat would echo through the Mongol Empire for generations. Whispered in tents from the steppes of Central Asia to the gates of Vienna. This wasn't just a battle. It was the moment when the most successful military machine in human history learned that some men simply refused to be conquered. And that refusal, backed by frozen ground and ancestral fury, could cost more than any victory was worth. The Golden Horde by 1240 had achieved what no empire before or since has matched. They had crushed the armies of China, reduced Persian fortress cities to ash, shattered the knightly orders of Europe in open battle, and made the word Mongol itself a prayer to ward off nightmares. Their strategy was elegant in its brutality: surrender and live as slaves, or resist and watch everything you love burn. City after city chose slavery. Those who chose resistance simply ceased to exist. Kiev, the jewel of the Rus lands, had held 50,000 souls before the Mongols arrived. After 3 days, fewer than 2,000 traumatized survivors picked through the ruins. This was conquest elevated to apocalypse, and it was rolling north toward the last free territories like a storm that had already drowned half the known world. But in the northern forests, something had survived that the Mongol war machine hadn't accounted for. The Varangians. These weren't the Viking raiders who had terrorized European coasts 2 centuries before. These were their descendants, warriors who had served Byzantine emperors, who had carved their names into the Hagia Sophia, who carried in their blood and bone the memory of men who believed death in battle was the highest honor existence could offer. They were anachronisms, fighting with tactics from a dying age against the military revolution of the future. Every strategic calculation said they should have been swept away in an afternoon. Every principle of warfare said 100 infantry could not withstand 10,000 cavalry. But mathematics has never accounted for men who have already made peace with their graves. The Mongol force assigned to clear the northern forests numbered 10,000 riders under a commander named Chagatai, a veteran of campaigns that had toppled dynasties. His men had reduced fortified cities to rubble, had made armored knights flee in terror, had perfected the art of mounted archery to a degree that seemed almost supernatural to European eyes. Each warrior commanded 3 to 5 horses, ensuring fresh mounts for pursuit or withdrawal. Each carried composite bows that could punch through chainmail at distances where most enemies couldn't even see clearly. They moved through winter forests like a bronze serpent, expecting to crush the last pockets of resistance before spring. What they found instead was a valley barely 200 yards wide, hemmed by dense forest on both sides, with the frozen Kama River cutting off retreat at the far end. And in the narrowest point of that valley, 100 men had formed a shield wall. Not fleeing, not negotiating, not even making noise, just standing in absolute silence, their breath misting in the dawn light, their shields overlapping like dragon scales, their axes catching the weak winter sun. The positioning was either tactical genius or mass suicide. In that confined space, Mongol mobility died. Their ability to encircle and destroy was strangled by geography. But Chagatai had broken shield walls before. The solution was always the same: rain arrows until the formation collapsed under the weight of dead and dying men. He gave the order: 5,000 composite bows bent as one. The sky darkened. 5,000 arrows arced through the morning air with a sound like wind through dead trees. This was the storm that had broken the will of armies from Beijing to Budapest. The arrows fell like winter sleet, a hissing death that should have turned the shield wall into a pincushion of northern corpses. The shields came up in practiced unison. The arrows rattled against wood and rang off mail like deadly hail. A few men grunted as shafts found gaps, but the line held. Not a single man fell. The second volley came, then the third. For 10 minutes, arrows fell until the Varangian shields bristled like porcupines. Still the line stood. Still not one voice cried out. The psychological impact on the Mongols was immediate and visceral. Every other enemy had wavered under the arrow storm. Men always broke when death fell from the sky. But these Northmen simply endured, patient as stone, silent as winter. Chagatai tried the feigned retreat, the classic Mongol tactic that had lured countless armies to their destruction. 1,000 riders charged forward, loosing arrows at full gallop, then wheeled and fled, shouting challenges in broken Rus. "Come out and die with honor. Don't cower behind wood." The Varangians didn't move, not one step. The discipline was inhuman. By mid-morning, frustration crept through the Mongol ranks like poison. These men violated every rule. They wouldn't pursue. They wouldn't break. They wouldn't even respond to insults. Mongol warriors who had conquered from sunrise to sunset began to mutter about northern magic, about men who had made pacts with frost demons. At 9 in the morning, Chagatai ordered direct assault. He selected 500 of his finest heavy cavalry veterans who had shattered the ironclad knights of Poland and Hungary. They formed disciplined ranks, lances lowered, horses stamping, the drum beats built to thunder. This would end it. The charge began at a trot, building speed down the gentle slope toward the shield wall. But the morning sun had turned the ice beneath the snow into a sheet of treachery. Horses bred for steppes struggled for footing. The narrow valley compressed the charge, forcing riders closer together. By the time they reached full gallop, they were packed so tight that a fallen horse would take down 3 others. 200 yards. The Varangians stood motionless. 100 yards. Still no movement from that silent wall. 50 yards. Mongol cavalry lowered lances for impact. 25 yards. And then it came Odin. The roar erupted from 100 throats simultaneously, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Horses already struggling on ice shied at the sudden thunder. The cavalry line wavered, bunched, lost its cohesion, and then they hit. The impact was apocalyptic. Wood cracked. Metal screamed against metal. Horses shrieked. Men roared in a dozen languages. But the shields held. Against every law of physics and momentum, they held. The front rank of Varangians had braced their shields against the frozen earth. Each man's shoulder pressed against his neighbor. creating an interlocked wall that dispersed the force of impact like ripples on water. Lances designed to punch through infantry shattered against northern oak. Horses unable to stop crashed into the wall and reared, exposing their riders to what came next. 100 axes rose and fell in perfect unison. The Varangian counterstrike was mechanical in its precision, beautiful in its brutality. 6-foot Danish axes, swung by men who had trained since boyhood, carved through Mongol armor like parchment. The sound was wet and meaty and final. Snow turned from white to pink to crimson in heartbeats. Elite cavalry, the pride of the Golden Horde, fell like wheat before the scythe. Horses screamed and thrashed, their hot blood steaming in frozen air. And the dying horses didn't simply fall. In that narrow valley, they created a wall of thrashing flesh. The second rank of cavalry, unable to stop, crashed into their own fallen comrades. The brutal arithmetic of the valley began its work. With that prevented flanking, ice that stole footing, and now a growing rampart of horse corpses that blocked advance. A young Varangian named Ericsson, barely 16, found himself face to face with a dismounted Mongol veteran. The Mongol came at him with a curved saber that had drunk the blood of knights and peasants. For 3 heartbeats, they danced, experience against youth, speed against strength. Then Ericsson's axe found the gap between helmet and shoulder. The Mongol fell, and Ericsson wept even as he raised his shield against the next attacker. Chagatai watched his elite die and felt doubt for the first time. But retreat was not in the Mongol vocabulary. He ordered wave after wave, 1,000 light cavalry, then another 1,000, each time they hit that wall of shields and axes and inhuman discipline. Each time they paid in blood and broken horses. The valley floor became a bog of churned earth, blood, and melting ice. Mongol mobility didn't just decrease, it died in that crimson swamp. Their greatest advantage, the speed and maneuverability that had conquered continents, meant nothing in a funnel of death 200 yards wide. In desperation, Chagatai ordered fire arrows, bundles of oil-soaked rags tied to shafts, lit and sent arcing toward the shield wall. This had broken the spirit of cities from Samarkand to Kiev. 2 Varangians became human torches, their death screams piercing the battle din. But their brothers didn't break. They didn't even flinch. The burning men were pulled back. Their suffering ended with merciful axe blows, and fresh warriors stepped forward to take their places. The shield wall endured, now decorated with flame and shadow. The message was clear. Pain meant nothing. Wounds meant nothing. Only the line mattered. By the 7th hour of battle, the pile of horse corpses had grown to a grotesque monument 6 feet high. Mongol warriors had to climb their own dead to reach the Varangians. Their arrows were running low. Each warrior had started with 120 shafts. Thousands upon thousands had been fired, and most lay useless, embedded in shields or lost in the muck. For the first time in memory, the Mongol arrow storm faltered. Whispers began among the horde. These weren't men, they were demons. Odin's chosen, the Einherjar, who could not die until their appointed time. How else could 100 stand against thousands? How else could they shrug off wounds that would fell normal warriors? And then, sensing the moment with the instinct of men who had nothing left to lose, the shield wall took a step forward. Then another. 70 men, perhaps fewer, began to advance. Their war song rose, an ancient chant that predated Christianity, that spoke of glory and death, and the halls where warriors feast forever. The psychological impact was devastating. They weren't defending anymore. They were attacking. Chagatai himself took up his lance. 2,000 riders formed behind him for one final charge. Every remaining mounted warrior compressed into a fist of fury aimed at the Varangian center. This would end it, one way or another. Because it had become about more than victory, it had become about the very idea of Mongol invincibility. The impact shattered the morning. The Varangian center bent, buckled. For the first time, Mongols broke through. The melee became general, all order lost in the press of bodies and clash of steel. This was murder at arm's length, where skill mattered less than will. Chagati's lance found only air as Bjorn the Unbreakable, the white-bearded commander of the Varangians, stepped aside despite his wounds and brought his grandfather's axe down in an arc that would echo through legend. The Mongol commander's horse fell screaming. Chagatai rolled free, saber in hand, and faced the giant who had orchestrated this impossible defense. For 10 heartbeats they circled, east meeting north, future meeting past, mobility meeting immovability. When Chagatai's saber found Bjorn's side, the old warrior trapped the blade with his own body and brought his axe down one final time. Chagatai fell, skull split, and with him fell something more precious than life, the Mongol will to fight. It began with warriors nearest the fallen commander. Seeing their leader dead, watching the white-bearded demon still standing despite wounds that should have killed 3 men, they took involuntary steps backward. The movement spread like ripples on a pond. Within moments, what had been a desperate assault became a rout. 10,000 of the finest warriors in human history turned their backs on a battlefield. Not from strategy, from fear. For the first time in a generation, the Golden Horde ran. The Varangians did not pursue, they couldn't. Of the 100 who had stood at dawn, 31 lay dead among the corpses of their enemies. 68 still breathed, but barely half could stand without support. Bjorn, the Unbreakable, lived up to his name for another hour, long enough to see the Mongol banners disappear into the forest, long enough to speak the words that would echo through northern legend, "Tell them we held, we held." Then the accumulated wounds, 7 arrows and 3 deep saber cuts, finally claimed their due. He died standing, his hands still gripping the axe that had drunk so deeply of Mongol blood, his eyes fixed on the forest where his enemies had fled. In 8 hours, 100 men had faced 40 separate charges, withstood over 50,000 arrows, and inflicted casualties estimated at over 800 dead, with hundreds more wounded. Conservative numbers place the exchange rate at 8 Mongols for every Varangian who fell. But numbers don't capture what happened in that nameless valley. What died there was something more precious to empires than soldiers: the myth of inevitability, the belief that some forces cannot be stopped, only endured. Within days, every Rus survivor from Kiev to Novgorod knew the tale. 100 had stood against 10,000. The invincible Mongols had been stopped by farmers with axes. In taverns and halls, around fires, and in huddled groups of refugees, the story grew. The impossible had been made real through courage and frozen ground. The strategic impact rippled outward like cracks in ice. Mongol commanders who had treated forest regions as minor obstacles now saw them as potential death traps. Every narrow valley might hide another band of desperate men willing to trade their lives at terrible exchange rates. The mathematics of conquest suddenly included a new variable: terrain where Mongol advantages became liabilities. The northern forests, which should have been swept clean in a single winter campaign, remained contested for years. Novgorod never fell. The fur trade that had enriched the Rus for centuries continued, funding resistance that might otherwise have withered. Here's what haunts me most. In the meticulous Mongol chronicles of conquest and glory, no mention exists of this valley. Defeat was beneath documentation. To acknowledge such a loss would be to admit that the mandate of heaven had limits, that there existed men whom the eternal blue sky did not favor. Better to let silence swallow the shame, but legends have their own life. The tale spread beyond the Ruslands. In Sweden, Norway, Denmark, wherever the old blood still ran, warriors heard of their distant cousins who had made the world's conquerors bleed. The Varangian Guard in Constantinople, that elite unit that traced its lineage to Harald Hardrada himself, added new verses to their battle songs. When spring came, it revealed more than bodhies. Archaeological evidence found centuries later confirmed the saga's truth. Mass graves filled with Mongol and Varangian dead, arrowheads by the thousands preserved in acidic soil, and at the center, a great fire pit where heroes had been given to the flames, according to the old rites. The survivors burned their dead for 3 days, despite exhaustion that went bone deep, despite wounds that wept blood and pus. They would not leave their brothers for wolves and ravens. Each warrior was laid out with his weapons, his mail cleaned of blood, his face composed in death's peace. That valley proved something empires fear more than armies. It proved that mythology could defeat mathematics, that while multiplied by terrain could overcome numbers, that some men, when given the choice between slavery and a meaningful death, will choose death and make it so expensive that even empires choke on the bill. The Varangian 100 didn't just hold a line, they held an idea, the idea that refusal itself, when backed by cold earth and colder resolve, could make the unstoppable hesitate. Modern military academies study battles like this: Thermopylae Rorke's, Drift, Chosen Reservoir. Again and again, history proves that terrain plus determination can multiply fighting power beyond mathematical logic. Small forces in the right position with the right mindset can achieve strategic effects far beyond their numbers. In the end, they came as conquerors and left as storytellers of defeat. The frozen valley where farmers shattered Mongol invincibility became cursed ground, avoided by the Horde, not by walls or armies, but by blood paid and remembered. The shield wall held that winter-in memory-proving courage, fused with terrain and acceptance of death, can halt empires forever.